There are a lot of reasons to consider switching to Linux these days. Chief among them, Windows 10 support's dying, Windows 11 is locked into new hardware, and there's weird AI stuff that threatens your security and privacy, and the Apple ecosystem is more expensive than ever. On the flip side, Linux has gotten easier and easier to install, use as a regular user, and even game on. With all of that, there's never been a better time to switch to Linux. Still, it can be pretty intimidating, especially if you're not really into computers. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to install a beginner-friendly Linux distro called Linux Mint, and then we're going to go through how to use it and go about your day-to-day functions, like updating the operating system, installing applications, using your web browser, watching YouTube videos, all of that kind of stuff. We're just going to go through the absolute basics today. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Before we get started, there's two things we need. First, you need one of these USB sticks. At least about 8 gigabytes will probably be enough, and you need a PC. That's what we're going to be installing Linux onto. That might be your laptop, that might be your desktop, whatever it is, that's cool. If it's a Mac, that's a whole other thing. We will not be covering how to install Linux on a Mac today, because that is a very different kind of work. So, Windows PC, USB drive, 8 gigabytes. Then we're good to go. We're going to need to download two things to get started. First is Linux Mint itself. So there are a lot of different flavors of Linux. We're going to be installing one called Linux Mint. The reason is it's built to be friendly to Windows users. It looks a lot like Windows and kind of behaves a lot like Windows, and also does a lot of setup for you so that things just kind of work. I like Linux Mint a lot. We're going to be going with that. So you're just going to Google Linux Mint, download, go with the Cinnamon edition. There are other ones. Cinnamon is my favorite. So we're going to hit download. You can see it tells you this is going to be 3 gigabytes. I still think 8 gigabytes instead of 4 gigabytes for your USB drive is a good idea, but that should do. Now, to download, you need to scroll down and pick a mirror. These are different servers that give you access or allow you to download Linux Mint. Pick whatever is closest to you. It's not a big deal though. So I'm going to pick Waterloo Computer Science Club, and I'm going to let that go into my downloads. Whatever's closest to you geographically is going to work best, but it doesn't matter that much. While that downloads, we need something else. The next thing we need to do, find a way to get our Linux Mint ISO, that's the thing that's going to install Linux Mint on our computer, onto this USB stick. The tool we use for that is called Balena Etcher. So we can search that up, click that, and all you need to do is download this. So we're going to click Download Etcher. It's going to ask you what platform you're on. We're going to select Windows. If you're on Windows, if you're already on Linux, you already know how to do this. So we're going to click Download, and it's just going to appear in our Downloads folder. Now, the reason we need to use Balena Etcher is because ISO files, the installer we're using for Linux Mint, they're not the same as usual files. You can't just drag and drop them onto the USB. You need to flash them onto a USB stick. Don't worry about what that means. The important part is Balena Etcher will do that for you. Now what we're going to do is just open up Balena Etcher. So I just did that from the Downloads button over here, clicked on that. It should launch Balena Etcher, and here we go. So what we're going to do now is click Flash from File. That's the Linux file we just downloaded. It's called an ISO. So I'm going to select Linux Mint 22.2 and hit Open. Then we're going to take this USB stick and plug it into any available USB port you've got, right? Preferably a USB 3 one, that'll be faster, but it's fine if you don't know the difference or you don't have a USB 3 port available to you, whatever. Okay, so I plugged mine in. Now I'm going to hit Select Target. We want to avoid these ones, these show hidden. They're hidden for a reason. That's your actual PC's hard drive. We don't want to overwrite those at all. That would be bad. We want to select this generic flash disk USB. You can tell by the size, right? My PC's hard drives are fairly big. This is only 16 gigabytes. We want USB device. Yours should also say USB device or something like that. We're going to select that, and then we're going to hit Flash. This will take, and then we'll say yes. This will take somewhere between 5 and 20 minutes, depending on your computer. It gives you this nice little ETA for how long this is going to take. Those are rarely accurate. If it stalls for a little bit, apply a little patience, wait it out. If you've been waiting for any progress for more than like 10 minutes though, then something has probably gone wrong. It does a fairly good job of going through this countdown. After flashing, it'll also do a verification step. So we're going to wait that out. You might be tempted to skip the validation phase. It's a really good idea to just let that go. 95% of the time, it's not necessary and things just work. But if you're that 5% and something goes wrong and you skip the validation phase, now you're like, oh God, was that why? What's going on? Waiting an extra 2 minutes saves you a world of headache. So highly recommend not clicking the skip button here. Once you're done, this is what this is going to look like. It'll tell you flash completed, one successful target, you're good to go. If something went wrong, it will tell you. Look for that check mark, flash completed, you're good. If it didn't work, you're free to try again. Sometimes, God knows why, the flash just doesn't work and another attempt will. If your second attempt doesn't work, it may be your USB stick. So see if you have some other ones laying around. They're also pretty cheap on Amazon or Canada Computers or Best Buy or whatever kinds of stores sell tech in your country. So we've downloaded our Linux distribution, Linux Mint, and we've put it on this USB stick. At this point, we can start to install Linux on our machine. This is what I'm installing it on. It's a small PC, a mini PC, that's about as powerful as a Chromebook. So if you've got a laptop at least as powerful as a Chromebook, you're probably good to go. I'm gonna plug this thing in, and then I'm just gonna take our USB and slam that into any USB port on the machine. You'll do the same. At this point, I'll power on the device, and you're gonna see the sort of boot screen. It'll say Chewy on it. Yours is probably gonna be something like Dell or HP or something related to the brand of device that you're powering on, and I'll give you instructions from there. Okay, so this is my screen, and I'm slamming F11 and F2 because it didn't tell me which buttons to press, but it's usually one of those. This will bring you to BIOS. BIOS is scary looking, even for me, and I've been doing computers for a while. We want to jump over to boot. And then at this point, we want to select our USB device. So you can see over here, we've got the hard disk. That might be Windows for you. And then we've got USB device. For this particular device, I'm going to switch boot option 1 to the USB device. That's because I'm not provided a boot menu, which a lot of PCs would give you. My workstation does. Your device might have an explicit boot option, and you might be able to press like F8 is the one for my PC. That will give you a list of options, including this hard disk, as well as the USB. In this case, I don't have that, so I'm going to set boot option 1 to the USB device. That makes it so that when this thing boots up, and there is the USB plugged in, it will just launch from that, okay? And remember, that USB device is our Linux install media, okay? So I'm gonna set that. You'll see it put the hard disk below. So if you take the USB out later, you'll boot into the hard disk. So at this point, I'm going to save and exit. It'll, this time, boot from the USB. This shows me Grub. Grub is also really scary looking. But luckily, we don't need to know any of this stuff. All we need to do is read Start Linux Mint 22.2 and hit enter. This will bring us into something a little bit more familiar looking. Quick disclaimer, Linux Mint is actually running a lot better than it looks in this video. I'm capturing this through a capture card, and it's only getting 5 frames per second, which is why things look choppy. It's actually running at a beautiful 60 frames per second, so give it a little wiggle room when you're watching. So now we're loading up into the Linux Mint installer. Then sat at a black screen for maybe 45 seconds, just enough time to really freak me out. Installing Linux takes a little bit of patience. Using Linux, a lot easier these days. Okay, so this is the installer. The installer kind of lets you use Linux a little bit before you get acquainted with it. It's kind of cool. We can see things like the File Explorer or Firefox is installed by default, all of that kind of stuff. We're going to ignore all that because we're going to take a look at Linux later. Instead, we've got this install Linux Mint thing in the top left corner. We're just going to double click that like it's an executable on Windows. That's going to take a second. Eventually, that brings us to the actual install menu. So you're going to go through a couple of steps, kind of like when you install Windows 11 if you've ever done that. If you haven't, it's fairly straightforward. You're going to start by selecting your preferred language. I'm going to go with English. I hit continue. And then you can select a keyboard layout. I'm going to go with English US, even though I'm Canadian. I don't speak a lot of French, so I don't need the accents. Here you've got an option to install multimedia codecs. Definitely do this. I won't get into why, it's just super useful no matter what you're doing. So we're going to hit yeah. So we're going to click that checkbox and then we're going to continue. You're going to get the spinning wheel again. That's a recurring theme during the install process. I've specifically chosen a fairly low-powered machine to install Linux onto, so we're getting a lot of that waiting around. Okay, now this is the scariest part. If you're already using your PC with Windows, you have two options at this point. You can dual boot, which I will not be doing because I've tried it. It's a very appealing idea, but it never really seems to work well in practice for me. So on this machine, I am wiping all past Windows installations. We're going to erase the disk and install Linux Mint. We're going to apply 0 advanced features. We're just going to let it do its thing, erase disk, and install Linux Mint. So we're going to hit install now. It's going to warn you with some scary looking stuff. Yes, you do want to write the changes to disk. Otherwise, you won't have Linux installed. At this point, it's going to ask you for your time zone. That's useful for all sorts of things. I'm based in Toronto, so I'm going to go with that. New York's close enough. Why not? And then we're going to create a user. So my name's Nathan. It's going to give me a computer name. I'm going to call it Nathan Linux Mint. I'm happy with the username Nathan. I'm going to give it a password. I'm also going to log in automatically. I like that. If you don't want to do that, don't click it. You can require your password to log in. We're not going to do any sorts of encryption. That'll just complicate things, and we want to keep this as simple and straightforward as possible. So after that, we're going to continue. Now this is going to go for, again, between 5 and 20 minutes. It probably isn't going to flash anything crazy at you, and you're going to see this progress bar sort of progress during that time. So I'm going to let this go and then get back to you once that's ready. Once it's done, it's going to tell you it's done, and then you get the option to restart now. So let's do that. It takes a second to power down, but no worries. Oh, this is nice. It tells us to remove the installation medium, that's your USB stick, and then press enter. So we're going to do just that. Once you're done that, all traces of Windows or whatever operating system that was on your computer before this are gone. It's all Linux Mint all the way down now, okay? So we're gonna boot up and take a look at what that's like. So we get hit with our boot screen again, Chewy. Chewy's just the company that makes this mini PC that I like. Okay, so here we are in a fresh installation of Linux Mint. I want you all to know that one great cup of coffee was spilled during the making of this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you appreciate this coffee sacrifice. All right, so we're booted in, and Linux Mint is nice enough to give us a full tour of what it's got to offer. It says, welcome to your new operating system. This welcome screen will guide you through your first steps. So let's hit let's go. At this point, it walks you through a little bit of customization. So you can pick your favorite colors. I don't really care. I'm happy with Linux Mint's green, so we'll stick with that. We're going to skip system snapshots for now. We are, however, going to look at the driver manager. Drivers are what make your computer's hardware work properly. This will automatically detect if you have any hardware that might need customer-specific drivers. If, for example, you want to game on this machine, and you've got like an NVIDIA graphics card, the driver manager will detect that you've got that NVIDIA graphics card and install necessary drivers. This is super nice. It told us we don't need anything, we're good to go. There's also an update manager. So just like if you're on Windows, there's notifications about updates, Linux will notify you about updates for your machine. The difference is Linux won't force you to update at any point. It's also significantly less likely to randomly break. Almost 10 years of experience with Linux and Windows has broken on an update way more than a Linux distribution like Linux Mint. So we're gonna hit launch. I'm just gonna hit OK, and it's telling me, hey, there's an update, so we can apply that update. It's gonna ask me for my password, so we're gonna give it. When you've installed a machine for the first time, there's usually going to be some updates because the install media that you used usually isn't perfectly up to date. So it's telling us, hey, you've actually got quite a few of bits of software to update, and you can just say install updates. Again, it's gonna ask me for my password. This is kind of like running as administrator on Windows. Same idea. My coffee. As with anything, this is going to take 5 to 10 minutes. All right, so our updates are done, which is good news. Nothing's broken, which is kind of crazy. Then it tells us we can take a look around our system settings, which have a lot more customization than you might be used to coming from Windows. Let's take a quick peek through those now. So if we launch them, you can see things like account details, accessibility, all the things you might be used to. You've even got some common interactions like hot corners and things like drag to the side, just like you would on Windows, these sorts of productivity features. That's pretty nice. You can adjust themes, right? I'm going to switch to a dark mode here, maybe I'm going to stick with the Linux Mint green color for the vibes. You can adjust your date and time. You can adjust your desktop icons from here as well. So if you want to see your trash bin or other things like that, you can just put that there. And there's also the usual suspects like Bluetooth. If you want to connect Bluetooth mice or speakers and things like that. If you're working with Wi-Fi, you can adjust your network settings this way. Printers, all the usual affair, pretty easily doable, just like you would on Windows or something like that. We'll take a deeper dive into connecting things like Bluetooth controllers and things like that in a little bit. After that comes maybe one of the weirdest parts if you're coming from Windows. In Windows, the Microsoft Store is terrible. Nobody installs anything through the Microsoft Store unless they have to. On Linux, the app stores are fantastic, a lot more like Apple's App Store. So if you want to install new software, you can do that via the software manager. From here, you've got all the usual suspects. You can install Bitwarden as a password manager. It'll advertise to you Steam, for example, and we'll go through installing Steam and maybe playing a game or two. If you want something to play music, you can install Spotify this way. We can go ahead and install Spotify if this is how we want to listen to music. I'm going to do that now as our example for installing stuff. You can see it happens fairly quickly. I can then launch Spotify. At this point, because this is one of the first applications we've installed, it's asking me about a keyring. Think of this kind of like macOS's password storage. It works a lot like that. So you need a password to unlock your password storage. We're going to set that now. So now I can launch Spotify, log in, do all the usual music playback, which I won't be doing here. You can also, in what looks a lot like the start menu, now find Spotify. Pretty sweet. If you ever need to install more applications, it's as easy as going to your start menu, typing in software, and selecting your software manager. That'll bring that back up, do a little bit of loading, and you can search for whatever you're looking for. Discord, for example, and we can install that all the same way. You'll see things like Flatpak and FlatHub. These are details about where the application is coming from and how it's installed and runs on your operating system. If that's not familiar to you and you're not interested, you can flat out ignore that. It's not a big deal. You can just go ahead and click install and it'll work the way it works. Whenever you install something that has other requirements, Linux will also let you know, hey, there are some requirements. I'm going to install these. You might want to take a look. Again, if you're not interested in all that, that's okay. You can just hit continue. So that's the basics of installing applications and using them on Linux Mint. Let's take a look at what other things come pre-installed with Linux Mint. So you may want to do some Office stuff, right? Mess with Word docs, make PowerPoints. Linux Mint comes pre-installed with LibreOffice, which is a free version of something like Microsoft Office. You can go ahead and launch, for example, LibreOffice Writer, and this works a lot like Google Docs, Microsoft Word, that kind of thing. There's also a spreadsheet equivalent and a PowerPoint equivalent, all the usual stuff. Let's take a closer look around at some of the other elements of your operating system. Let's put me on the top right here. Along the bottom, you've got something like the Windows taskbar, right? On the left, you've got your start menu. You've got pinned applications, right? So we've got our file manager, which looks a lot like Windows File Manager as well. You can click on it and type paths. You can double click on different folders, create no folders by right-clicking, creating folders, right-clicking, create document, the same kinds of stuff you do on Windows. We've also got Firefox by default. You can install Chrome or whatever your preferred browser as well. You can pin applications. For example, if we go to our start menu, search up Discord, we can add to panel, and that's this guy down here. Same thing as your taskbar. If you want to populate this start menu a little bit, you can see we've got a bunch of things along the side. We can take Discord, right-click it again, and we can add that to our favorites. And that appears right there, just like it would on Windows. Pretty sweet. On the right, we've got more usual stuff, right? So we've got our date and calendar stuff. We've got our battery, but not just the battery of the device. Also, this is plugged in, so battery's not a thing. It also shows us battery indicators for things like wired devices, like this mouse I'm using. You can change if you want to be in power saver mode, balance, performance, whatever. You've also got your networking button. This shows you a little bit more than Windows would by default. You can see which network controllers you have available to you. I would not touch those. If you don't know what you're doing, that's fine. You can just leave it to whatever's working already. You can turn on or off wireless, and you can see your Wi-Fi, your potential Wi-Fi connections. So we can actually click that, Mechanical Butler's Mine, and enter your Wi-Fi password, and it'll just connect. Wi-Fi works no problems, just like it would on Windows or Mac OS. Along with that, many of your other intuitions about what would work on Windows also works here. So for example, if I right-click, you'll see display settings, just like you would on Windows, and you can configure your monitor and do that kind of stuff. You can change your desktop background, so maybe we want to use a different Linux Mint thing. We can also add new wallpapers and stuff like that. It comes with a bunch of non-Linux Mint ones as well if you want to configure that. Whatever you want to do, Linux Mint will help you do it. So let's talk about gaming on Linux now. We've got the basics out of the way. Installing new software, browsing around, configuring settings, network, all of that sort of stuff. Let's install Steam and have out some gaming. This is a really low-powered PC, so I'm not going to be running like Red Dead Redemption 2 or anything like that. We're just going to go through the process of installing Steam, installing a game, and having at it. If you're not a gamer, you can just skip past this section. No hard feelings. If you are, though, we're going to do the same thing we did earlier to install Discord and other applications. We're going to open up our software manager, and then we're going to search for Steam, and we're going to pick the first one, and we're just going to hit install like we did last time. It'll tell you, hey, there's a bunch of things that you need to install to make Steam work. Are you cool with that? And I am. So I'm going to hit continue and hand it my password. And that'll go for 5-10 minutes or whatever. Steam has finished installing. We're just going to hit launch. It's going to tell us where it wants to install it. That's all good. I'm just going to hit install. It launches once it's done, and then you can log in. Once you jump through all the usual hoops to log in, two-factor authentication and all of that, Steam just launches. We've downloaded Hollow Knight. We can hit play. It does a little bit of extra configuration, but on Linux Mint, a lot of those extra steps are hidden away for you, so you don't have to be aware of them. So Steam is warning us that this game is best played with a controller. This is a great time to show off how Bluetooth works. So I've got this Nintendo Switch controller. I'm just going to try to connect that. So down here in the bottom right, we've got our Bluetooth button. I'll set this controller to pairing mode, and then we'll hit search over here, and it shows up right away. This used to be a pain on Linux. Bluetooth is phenomenal these days. So I'm going to hit connect, and we even get, let me move my face out of the way, a little notification that tells us our Pro controller is connected. So I'm going to hit OK, and the game's going to launch. So we've got our controller hooked up, we hit play, and the game just launches. Now, what you're going to see in the recording is kind of choppy. That's not what's actually happening on my machine. On my machine, I'm getting a smooth 60-ish frames per second, but because of the way that I'm recording this machine over to my recording machine, it doesn't look too great. We can ignore that for now. Anyways, I won't be playing Hollow Knight on this video. So that's gaming. You can just install Steam, very similar to how you would on Windows, and you can get through all of your single-player games no problem. There's some details about the way Linux handles compatibility that you may need to do some tweaks on for some specific games, but a lot of games do just work. And if you're curious about which games work, you can look at protondb.com. Protondb.com basically gives you an overview of what games are working well on Steam on Linux. Welcome to your home for crowdsourced Linux and Steam Deck game compatibility reports. So if you're interested in playing a game on Linux but you're not sure if it's going to work, check protondb.com first. Also, if you're into online multiplayer games, some of those just won't work on Linux. This is unfortunate, and it's not Linux's fault. It usually is the fault of the developers. So for example, if you're a fan of anything made by Riot Games, League of Legends, Valorant, those don't work due to the way anti-cheat systems work. They're tied into Windows. That's unlikely to change anytime in the near future. As well, some other multiplayer games, often by Epic, don't work very well. Fortnite does not work. Apex Legends, games like that. Your single player and co-op games are going to work great though on Linux. So that's the basics. You've got a computer, it operates a lot like Windows, your intuitions about what to click and where to go and where settings are pretty much the same. Installing software is a little bit different, but in my opinion, a lot easier. Instead of Googling downloaders and executables and installers, you just go to the one application store, your software manager, click install on the thing that you want, and it'll appear. There are, however, a couple of caveats of using Linux. So if you're tied into, say, the Adobe suite, right? You use Photoshop or something like that. Adobe currently doesn't support Linux. There are ways to get this working. We're not going to cover those in this video, but it is a big pain and it's not perfect. So if you're tied deeply into the Adobe ecosystem, Linux may not be for you, or you may want to keep a Windows or Mac machine somewhere to continue doing your work. So there are still some reasons to not use Linux or keep Linux as your only operating system. However, if what you do most of the time is browser based, if you're doing a lot of single player gaming and that sort of thing, if you're using your PC to just get homework done or day-to-day work, Linux is going to handle that no problem. And if you're a computer science student or a programmer or something like that, Linux is going to be amazing. I don't have to talk about that to those people in this video, but I definitely will be somewhere down the future. So that's that. Thank you so much for watching. If you do end up installing Linux, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what your experience is, especially if you installed Linux Mint after this. I'll be making plenty more videos, both from the beginner lens with Linux all the way up to more experienced home labbing and DevOps and things like that, so stay tuned.